So really today we only have about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on getting through just some general ideas and some topics to discuss so we can get into Q&A and actually have some situational questions because when you're talking about this topic of how technology can affect your life and healthcare and things like that, there's a lot of situational things that can come up. So I want to leave some time there. And I want to also leave you a little bit of time to just kind of take down your notes, think about things, and then really my number one rule whenever I speak is it's just let's be real with each other. I'm here to be helpful to you all, and so I am a lot of times available afterwards if you want to LinkedIn connect with me, ask a question. Typically, I stay on social for a little bit afterwards, and so if there's something I didn't address today, just because this is a very short time. Definitely reach out via LinkedIn. Definitely reach out. My email I'll give at the end of the speech as well. So hopefully that's a good rule, and I want to truly be helpful. To start off, really, this is it's kind of a touchy subject in sometimes in different areas where you're using technology or when you're wanting people to use technology because a lot of people there's some massive barriers to how they incorporate technology into everyday life. Honestly, I'm live in Missouri. I like my space. I've got a lake house where I like being peace there. I like having my peacefulness without technology being involved. However, unfortunately, the next generation is growing up a lot differently than I did. So it's so important that we are embracing technology in so many different ways. And also just getting over the barrier of trying to incorporate it in everyday life because it can make your life easier. But I'll be honest, like for me, it's even had me like being in the generation that I am, like struggling with, okay, do we have to incorporate everything, technology into everything? The answer is it's what's in your comfort zone, and then also to really challenge yourself that if you do have an overall goal to accomplish, that technology can be a massive asset to help you get there faster, quicker, and be more productive. So before we get into the habits and the strategies, one of the moments that I had where it kind of stood out to me as that moment where technology, it's almost like I knew I needed to make an effort to incorporate it in my life a little more, was this moment with my daughter where she was 5 years old at the time. And I had my Timex watch with me. I was so excited because I don't know if you all remember what the Timex watch did. It was super innovative tech back in the day. And I went up to her and I was like, oh, I can't wait. I was like, this was my favorite toy when I was 5. And like, I got to go and I got to push a button and it blew, or it blew, there was a blue indigo light that shined. And I was so pumped. And so I went to give my favorite technology toy as a 5-year-old or when I was a 5-year-old to my kid. And you know what happened is that she looked at it and she just stared for a while. And she goes, call Grandma Hall. And I'm like, what? And she goes, call Grandma Hall. She legitimately thought that she was going to be calling Grandma Hall on my Timex watch, where I was excited. And I've got a video of this. It's hilarious. She gets so frustrated with herself. But ultimately, that was a moment where I connected with my daughter where I was like, you know what? And at first I was frustrated. But then I started thinking about how different people are growing up these days and how people are incorporating technology at advanced levels where my daughter is growing up in a world where she legitimately thinks a watch is to call grandma. It's not to light up like I was excited about. So I tell that story because a lot of times we have these barriers to incorporate technology into our everyday life with social or incorporating even just a technology tool to make our team more efficient. We're so stubborn, we're set in our ways, and in reality, it sometimes it's hard to get past that barrier. But I try and think about that moment with my daughter where it's like there's people that are incorporating this in everyday life in so many different ways. And so we have to lower our barriers and we have to be open to taking on new tools, taking on new technology. And that's one of the biggest barriers. If you look at, I think it's more than half of people have an issue with taking on a new technology, no matter what it is. They just don't take it. It doesn't matter if it's a very clear sign if it's going to make your life easier. There's this barrier to saying, I want to incorporate technology into my life. I've been doing it this way for so long. And so one of the things that I'm going to tell you kind of a personal story is that just how one of the companies that we invested in heavily was a company called calendar.com. And the reason why is that when we look at technology, we look at it, we need to accomplish a goal. So what is the goal? And that's what I encourage you all, is that when you are looking at the tech and your tech stack and the things you're doing, always think of what are we trying to accomplish first, and not is someone trying to sell us technology, is somebody trying to force this on us, is that what are we trying to accomplish? So I'll give you the example of calendar, is that when we were looking at developing that, one of the things that I had an issue with is that I honestly was not effective in my day. I'm a naturally, talkative person. I love chatting with people. I love being goofy and, running next door and just kind of having conversations with my coworkers. And so I have an issue with distractions. I have an issue with people taking over my schedule. So honestly, I'll be very real, is that I wasn't the most effective kind of productive person I could be on my team. And so when we were looking at calendar, what the first thing that we looked at is, what is the goal? And to kind of give you this case study or this example, is that we simply said is that, like, we want to be the most productive version of ourselves possible. So we looked at a bunch of different tactics and things that could be used. And time blocking is the term that kept coming up. If you type in HBR, time blocking, or things around time blocking, you'll see this article on how Harvard did this study on the most productive people use this time blocking technique. And those of you who don't know it, it is specifically to schedule blocks of time. So to schedule, during this 30 minutes, I'm going to do this task, or during this hour, I'm going to actually disconnect from my work to focus on family or my wife or something. And it actually gives you allocated times and specific tasks to do. So it's almost combining a calendar with a to-do list. So for us, when we were looking at technology for that, it's like, we want to be the most effective version of ourselves to help people schedule. So that's why when we were looking at like growing out a tool, it was like, what are the things that can do that? And so when you're evaluating technology, it's not about just the tech. It's like, where are we? You always have to start off, where are we going? And for us, it was making the most productive version of our team. We found a tactic that we really liked, and the kind of strategy of time blocking. And then we didn't see the tool that was out there that had it. Calendly was a close one that had it, Chili Piper and some other tools, but we ended up building this ourselves. Most of the time you can go out there, and what I would encourage you all to do is that when you have a goal you're trying to accomplish and you're trying to incorporate something in that goal, go on LinkedIn and say, hey, and just ask your network, ask your professional groups, ask the people around you, what tools are they using to accomplish that goal? And I'm telling you, it's unbelievable how many people will, when you just ask all different types of groups, how they will come to you. And then it goes in the review process, and it's still, don't be sold to, and don't just like say, oh, I want to incorporate this tool because everybody's saying I need to be on it. Focus on why you're incorporating that goal. So I'll give you an example of what we did that actually made a difference. Is that one of our goals was prioritization. And for me, a lot of times my schedule gets hacked a lot of times. And what I mean hacked is that I'll be, in a day, I'll think I'm going to get something done on my to-do list, and then people will just keep taking it over, and it drives me absolutely nuts. And so what I ended up starting to do is that we used calendar, and this is why I ended up investing as much into it, is that we used it to basically get different scheduling links depending on the type of meeting it is. So depending on the person, depending on the relationship, depending on how important it is to prioritize that time. So I'll give you an example. My wife has a calendar link that I created that is basically it's like a trump of it has every opening to my time possible, because my wife is the number one priority. She should have a lot of access to my time, and also for my own mental health, it's important to incorporate her in to my time. And so she has a link. Now I also like mentoring students and younger professionals because I want to pay it forward. However, that is on the other end of the spectrum. So when I'm using technology, I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm going to create a scheduling link here for my wife, a scheduling link here for this student. But the one with the student will have about 15 minutes, limitations on, and also when I'm doing things like I'm out on a walk or I'm traveling, I'll schedule that to kind of kill two birds with one stone. So when you look at that logic of when I'm incorporating tech, you have goal, you have what's the tactic and strategy to use it, and then it's incorporating the technology. And in that example that I was giving you, for me, I have about seven different links. And so for me, as soon as something pops up on my calendar, I know the type of or is it an informal? Is it a formal meeting? Is it something that's going to be long or short? I know it almost naturally evolves my time into prioritizing what matters. And also it helps me with no back and forth and what am I doing here and there. I kind of categorize it in a way where it's almost like a system. And so what I would tell you is that I know that sounds kind of crazy, that you're blocking out and you're scheduling out so much time. But for me, it makes it so that you have this natural process where this is what's important. This is what I spend this amount of time on, and this is when I spend it. And so that's extremely important when you're looking at technology to look at, okay, what actually is this accomplishing? So is this accomplishing us being productive and us time blocking? And yes, it did. So great use of technology. Another example, one I came across recently was Switchboard. And this is an example, I don't have an investment in this one, but the reason why I loved this one is because it is a tool that allows people from anywhere in the world remotely to look in one place and actually have a board where you can communicate, collaborate together as a team, and you can go over challenges, and it stays in that board, it stays in that room. You can exit, people can exit, and then you can go back in. So when you have a meeting, if it's unfinished, you can basically say, okay, great, we've kind of hit our wall here. Let's go back to this next week. So for me, I love that. Once again, I don't have a dog in that fight with that company. But at the same time, as I was loving recommending that recently to some groups, because it allowed me to, or it allows you to be truly effective with your time, where when you get to a wall, you don't have to just start from scratch when you, go back and when you schedule a meeting for later in the week, or you come back to that problem. It's there, all the data is there, all the notes are there, and you can immediately pick up with it well documented. And so for me, that was an example of a very good use of technology where when I was looking for that, the reason why that even got on my radar was one of the goals is that we have a new hybrid team. We built this beautiful office here. However, there's people that do work from home. And this allows us to basically say, hey, it really doesn't matter if you want to do an in-person brainstorm, we have this option. And it gives the goal of, hey, we're going more hybrid. But also, I really think it's important that we collaborate. And so I asked a variety of people on LinkedIn. I got different associations. This was one that just came up. But that's how that process that's how that process went, and it worked out extremely, extremely well for us. So the next thing is that when you're looking at different types of technology, I encourage you, before you sign up for any, test out their customer service. So go in, and even if you are already using a software, and like I would definitely call, I don't even care if you have a need, and just come up with some questions to see how helpful the tool is. Because that's another trend that's happening is right now we're going towards this extreme automation. And so you want to be able to know it's almost like dating before marriage. Like when you're about to sign up for a tool, contact their customer service, see how quickly they get to you, see if it's an actual legitimate person, see if they'll get on the phone with you. One that I really liked recently was Gusto, which is a payroll provider, where I'd had previous payroll providers where everything was automatic. It was like, Google Help, where you just can't get a person on the phone. That was one where I just tested it out. Honestly, I didn't have a reason to even call, but I wanted to see before we signed up how good their customer service was. And I went through their chat, went through the process to see how well their customer service is. And the importance of that is because ultimately the onboarding is so important. The team buy-in is so important. That's one of the biggest barriers you run into with technology, is that your team needs help. So does that company have the resources to get a salesperson, to get a customer service person on the phone to help walk your team through it? Because it doesn't matter anytime you're implementing a tool across the board, you're going to have challenges. No matter how smart someone is, either they didn't listen, or they didn't have buy-in initially, or something happens. So you want to make sure you're picking tools and setting things up for success with ones that have really good customer service there. Another thing is that one of the biggest lacks of or barriers is that people have pride, and they don't want to show that they don't know how to do things. And so they kind of cut it off, and it's because of an educational barrier. You have to put training processes in place where, okay, when we do incorporate, or if you're not using a tool, most technology tools have utilization rates and things that you can look into to see who's utilizing it if you're an admin. And a lot of times people just aren't using a tool that much. The reason why in most cases is because of education. So when you do have a technology or you're doing updates or things like that, make sure you're training. And almost what we do a lot of times is just check the box as saying, hey, do you agree that you understand everything about this tool? Did we set you up for success with this? And it's actually a checkpoint, because if they're not using it, and or if there is a challenge, they've already self-committed and saying, hey, this is something I understand, appreciate the training, and it worked out. So like in that case, like a lot of times just it's an investment up front, but part of the deal is that, like when I tell people, I'm like, when you budget money, budget about 80% for the technology and 20% for the training, onboarding, and making sure that that someone is there making or having you involve that technology in the right way in the company. And so as crazy as it is, add 20% to your budget when you're looking at those things. Common issues that I see come up a ton is that a lot of times people pick the wrong tools, or like I said, there's lack of buy-in. I recommend reading the book Hooked. It's written by a friend of mine, Neria Wall, who it's about how you can hook people on products, and that's from a sales side of things where it's coming from kind of the product side. But I think that's important for everyone to read, because if you're going to get your team to be connected to a product, you kind of need them to enjoy it, understand it, be hooked on it. And I think that's a great book that kind of hits on all that. Another thing is that there's a lot of issues with understanding the product, and also getting a product that that causes more distraction than helps. So Slack is one of the common things that comes up right now with technology, is that do we incorporate Slack in our company? Like right now I have 12 Slack channels for the things I'm involved in. If I turn on my notifications right now, you guys will be super annoyed and be like, what the heck is going on? Because it just goes, it's just that one, click noise that that Slack does, and it's extreme distraction. So you have to also look at that, is that and I'm not saying I'm not a Slack fan, obviously I use it. However, you have to pick tools and also educate your team on, hey, Slack can be a massive distraction, or Teams, or in this way it can be, there's different things that can be distractions, but they're great tools and they're great products, and there's things that you can do if they're taught the right way. So it's not just about understanding the product, but it's also about the pitfalls and the things that you want to avoid when you are incorporating or when you're incorporating technology. The ultimate motivation is with the people that you're trying to get to use technology within your organization, is they need to see the value to themselves. And I think that if you can incorporate that into performance reviews, if you can reward for using it well, I know it sounds silly, but we basically had a software where when the team got buy-in, we had like a goal of actually saying, hey, when everybody's on it, and what I loved about it, it was a team goal. So we set these this team goal because we thought that, hey, like in reality, we believe that this technology is a very important part to our future. So to get this buy-in from these people, anytime you want to understand someone's motivations to see the value, you want to align it with real value that they're getting with the tool, but then also, even on top of it, recognize it either through positive feedback during performance reviews. We even did compensation where you can say, oh, if the whole team gets on this, they do this well, we're going to bonus the team out in this way, or you can do something minor. But to keep on saying, oh, we're gonna, like, it's almost like as an employer or as a boss, sometimes we give technology, because the reason why is because we had to a lot of times beg for that budget or beg for that technology spend on the overall company budget. But it resulted in so we go in and we say, look, we got this tool for you, here you go. But in reality, a lot of those people using it weren't in on that fight and don't understand necessarily the value. So you have to help them understand how it's going to make their lives incredibly better and easier. And so a lot of times aligning bonus incentives with it can be a massive help to getting them to adopt. Another thing with getting the wrong tools is that getting in sales processes where there's just good salespeople, or it's a timing thing. What I tell people is that companies have turned, and this is I'm involved in a company called Relevance, where they create content for tech companies, and when you look at the companies that they work with, the tech companies and the people that are trying to incorporate tech typically are investing in content these days. So instead of going through a lot of times the sales channel, what I would recommend, or instead of going to the sales channel, what I would recommend is actually go to their blog, go to their, like, sign up for their newsletter, and anything once you start getting a glimpse of, hey, we might need this tool, or I'm interested in these 3 tools, go and sign up for the blog, go sign up for these things and nurture so that you're learning and then you're saving. What in reality, a lot of times it's just free training that you're getting. And it's also something that you can aggregate, share with your team. And it helps you make the best decision on which is the right tool. So like, for example, we see a lot of times people sign up for a tool because they assume things have that. Like it even happened with us transparently when I invested in calendars, that a lot of people assume we had group scheduling. Now we have group scheduling, but they'd sign up and we'd actually waste some time there because they actually didn't know. They just assumed it was a part of the overall package. And so like I said, now we have that. It's still a problem, though, that we have to look at that on our side and say, hey, we need to be better at educating where our features are in the tool or in the process through our blog, through the content. But then on the reader side, you have to really understand that, like, a lot of times technology investments are not just about the dollar amount. It's about understanding the tool. It's about when to bring it on. And it's about understanding all the features. And that takes a lot of time. And so, go in. I would say, like, for us, like, any of the tools, like like Relevance, for example, that company, Moz, HubSpot, there's a lot of companies in that space that create great content. So when you look in your space, say, okay, who are companies that are, leading through, through content, and let's sign up for these things. And then over time, we'll be able to make better decisions on the technology and also get free training while we're doing it. So if I'm going to kind of sum up some of the topics that I've kind of gone over, it's like you saw first off, the example of me using calendar, like that was a natural way that I incorporate technology into the first off, it's the goal, setting that, making that super clear, then going into the next phase where it's what tactics am I using, and then what technology fits into it. We've talked about the different ways you get recommendations. And then also understanding that with your team, you've got to get buy-in in a way where they're trained well on it. The onboarding is great. The customer service for a product actually works well, so that it's not just setting you up for the onboarding, but for the long term. And then also you're doing the things to motivate the team across the board through either compensation or goals together. I strongly recommend team goals, as I just hit. But it's vital that a lot of this isn't rocket science, but you're taking these steps because, once again, go back to that story with my daughter. We're growing up in different ways. We're different people in how we understand technology. And to do that correctly, to make sure that the people that aren't as comfortable with technology are actually buying in with their teammates that are comfortable with technology, it's super important that you understand and do these things properly so you get the right buy-in. Different books that I would say to kind of learn a little more. Obviously, we talked about Near You all with Hooked. And then I think another thing, which is good, this is kind of an off one, that is essentialism. And it's Greg McKeown who wrote that book. It's not related to technology, and that's why I like it, but it talks about an essentialist view of life and how you work. And I think that when you combine the essentialism with when you use technology, you tend to operate better because you're using what's essential in tools, because once again, tools can be a distraction as well. So you want to make sure that the things you're incorporating are essential in your life, in this work-life balance. So that's kind of the general topics. I want to leave about 10 minutes here for Q&A and then some time to reflect on some of the conversation. So if you guys want to just start typing in some questions or chat, or if in the private chat, even if there's ones that you guys want to come up with, I can answer them, or I can go on with kind of drawing these out a little bit until I get them. Cool. We'll give you a second. I'm actually going to just take a sip of coffee while we're... All right. Okay, so I will. Nobody's jumping in. I guess we got a shy group. Typically in person, I get to reward people, and I'll have prizes and gifts and gift cards. But I guess I can't do that now. That's the limitations of virtual. Once again, this is healthcare event. So let's dive into that a little more. So from a standpoint of the common things that come up, like a lot of times with healthcare, it's so important for the actual experience of that people are going through. So, with whether you're doing technology for a healthcare company or you're involved in the patients, one of the big things that comes up is the service, the experience. And so a lot of times what I'm telling people about the technology that they're incorporating is that the first question is like, what is it truly doing for your customer? So like, and they're like, well, no, this helps this team operate. I'm like, but how does it help this customer? How does it help this client? How does it, what is the end goal that you're trying to do? Because a lot of times tools sound great and they sound like they'll make you more productive, but the whole reason for more productivity is for that end goal. So I always tell people is like, especially in that kind of the healthcare area, is that have that client mindset where it's like, what are we doing for the client first, and what is the tool's reaction to when we spend this money, when we do this onboarding, when we do this, what result are we expecting, and set the goals of what you want to see happen. And so for me, that's a crazy, like a lot of times when you're setting goals, you're setting business goals, you're setting goals related to numbers, or goals related to customer happiness. We a lot of times look, when we incorporate technology, we say, here's the baseline prior to incorporating that technology, and then here is the goal. So we're trying to, when we're incorporating this, like for example, the calendar example that I will give you, or that I gave you earlier, is that ultimately, if I am working less and doing more, and I know that's silly, it's like, okay, working less and doing more, what does that mean? Well, to me, I was working 80, 90 hours a week for many years. I mean, I was an entrepreneur. I spoke at different events. We created companies, we created products. And so for me, I was somewhat of a workaholic. I wanted to get away from that. And so it was very clear that my goal with that was to be a more productive person, but also the measurement was, it's very simple. I don't want to work 80, 90 hours. I need to block off time and combine my to-do list, use that strategy of time blocking to be able to ultimately be able to be more effective, where I'm getting my hours down to 40, 50, which I have. And so it worked. Now there's could have been some other things that incorporated in that, but I do know that when I involved that tool, I was working less hours and I was doing more. We could easily see that, because when you combine your to-do list with, the calendar, you ultimately are able to do that. Another thing that comes up a lot of times is, how do we, and this is very simple, like, or how do we know who we should involve when technology is a part of an organization, or we're trying to incorporate this into our business? What I tell people is there's a RACI matrix. I don't know if you've ever, a lot of times people go to MBA or their MBA school and they see that a RACI matrix example. I can send you a template of it that I've just kind of made and sent to people when they ask for it. But what a RACI matrix does is that you have your tasks on one side, and then you have the people responsible for each task on the top of the matrix. The tasks on your on one side also have the technologies and the things that you're using to accomplish those tasks. You very easily, and it's called RACI because you put, who's responsible, who's accountable, who is who's support person for this technology or these tasks. And so that's a way where I love using RACI matrices when you're doing technology exercises and how you're incorporating tech, because one of the big things is that, okay, we're doing this. That's kind of a way of almost document what I told you. Here's the goal, here's the to-do, and here's the technology we're using. And then on top, here's who is involved and responsible for it. And we're marking the people, how they're involved and who's supporting that, who's driving that technology, and who's ultimately supervising it and holding it accountable. So that's a way where that's a very simple Excel doc that you can use anytime you're using a new tool, or you're testing out who's involved in this task and this tool that we're incorporating. And then it makes it very clear on, okay, when we're needing approval or when something happens, we incorporate this person into it, or these people need to be trained whenever there's a new update. So you start setting these natural systems and processes differences of the task and the technology behind it. So that's another thing. Is there any other questions? Want to make sure I leave it up to or leave it open. Also, once again, you can email me separately. My email is johnhallspeaking@gmail.com. That's johnhallspeaking@gmail.com. And ultimately, you can just send a quick email and say, hey, here's the challenge. And then within 48 hours, I'll get back to you with a quick response. We're coming up on our 30 minutes here. So I always try to leave at least 5 minutes left 5 to 10 minutes left to reflect, to spend time. If there are no questions, then in reality, spend 5 to 10 minutes thinking about, or if they move on to the next session, then you hopefully get a little more back at the end of your day. But think about these things aren't rocket science, but if you practice it, if you incorporate it in a way, you set up the process, you do the things that I've kind of talked about in that order, you end up getting buy-in, you end up incorporating tech in the right way, you end up measuring it in the right way, and ultimately you're a more productive team. So thank you for having me today, and I think you'll be good the rest of the day. Thanks for having me this morning, and hopefully you'll be in touch if you have any questions. Thank you.
Folks, that was John Hall. John, thank you so much. You have shared so much valuable information, tools, resources, and tips. I was taking notes like crazy, so thank you for all that great information. I've got a question for you.
Sure.
It might be top of mind for other people here. The workforce has become remote. A good percentage of us are working at home now. How has the challenge of measuring the productivity for leaders, how are they overcoming this challenge with their remote teams?
I mean, honestly, I'm being real with you. It's a huge opportunity for leaders because now it's top of mind. Like now it's like actually like on our minds more than ever because we had this pressure on us to be like, wait a minute, we haven't just think for years we were working in the same way. Or we were working in the same way in person. And so there wasn't as much of a sorry, I'm having some camera issues here. There wasn't as much of a pressure on us to really, really dive into it. Now all of a sudden we're like, oh crap, we're remote. We need to be productive. So it's like, what I love about that is that it creates this opportunity to actually be very deliberate. So nothing about productivity is, once again, I've mentioned it several times, it's not rocket science. There's not some crazy magical formula. It's like very common practices that you put in place. Time blocking has been around forever that I've talked about. Now, some of these new tools that we're creating are new, which are great. But in reality is that just being deliberate and being focused on it is the first step, and which is awesome because I think that the pandemic was a horrible thing, but as a result, it got us to think about how we can have the most optimal work environment. And for us, transparently, it's not, I love being in person, but it's kind of a mix. We have people come in 3 days a week. We have people come in 2 days a week. And we actually don't have any, even during the pandemic, because we have a huge outdoor area. We have everybody has private offices. You can social distance well. However, we still had to think, even without a pandemic, is this the right environment for us? So what I love about it got us time to take a step back, to be deliberate about what is the optimal work environment. And I love that as an entrepreneur because a lot of times you just do things because you've been doing them for 100 years. Now we've got a little reflection period. I think also the tools that are coming out from the pandemic are it's nuts how when the pandemic happened, we invested more in technology and the tools. That's why I told you, the investments that we made, and it was in those tools. So there was more money going into these remote tools and how to incorporate Switchboard. I don't know how long they were around, but I was like, that's really cool that they do that. And when I was even demoing, I'm like, this is something that I feel like money started going into these areas from the pandemic. So I think that the good news is that we can get in the most comfortable work environment for our people too. I love it how we now can have, I think, sometimes better talent if you really make an effort for them to be productive at home. So I think I tell people, I'm like, guys, all of my employees have either Veridesk autonomous desks at home. They have the setup where they can, and I was just asking once the other day, Sarah, I said, hey, what can we do to make you the most productive version of yourself at home as at the office? And then we'll compare. And in reality, like a lot of times we'll look at, okay, when you're at home, what's, what are you getting done? What are the tasks, all those things compared to the office? And a lot of times it's different per employee. So I think it's a very important time to reflect, take a step back, find out what's optimal, be deliberate about it, and then move together in the future with technology in the right way so that you actually come out a lot better than prior to the pandemic from, how your culture was and ultimately how productive your teams were.
Excellent. Yeah, and I've noticed just personally that when I'm working at home, I actually work more than when I
You
have
do.
to
You
go into
absolutely
an
can.
office. So I find myself at the computer in the evenings, like I never get to get away from it. Whereas going to the office, 5 o'clock, I just check out and do my thing. So, but it's cool that you can measure the productivity with the results, the hours worked versus what's getting done. And I think that's a really cool element of what you talked about. I also could appreciate the 80% investment in the technology, the 20% in training. As a trainer, I put a lot of value in learning and development and preparing employees and preparing our people for change, because nobody likes change. It's not
Yeah.
something we say, oh, goody, we're getting a new technology to learn. It's uncomfortable. We hate it. So how are leaders of maybe, some of the higher performing organizations that you work with or you've spoken with? I mean, how are these leaders actually motivating their people to get excited about introducing new technologies and trying new things that'll make them essentially more productive?
Yeah, it's funny that like sometimes people like especially if there's somebody older than me, they're like, well, you don't understand like how it is. We've done this for years, and I've heard that so many times, which is awesome to hear, because I'm like, man, I might look younger than you, but like I ate the same breakfast for 30 years, in a row. I had the same peanut butter toast with bananas on it, like legitimately. I'm married to the same woman. I don't like for forever. I'll be married till I die to her. Like I'm one of the people that once I find something I like, I want to stick with it. So when you ask me to do new technology, I'm like, what the heck? And so like for me, when I speak, and also once again, I'm investing in technologies. One of the reasons why I do invest in certain technologies like the calendars or appointments of the world, and we're invested in Gab Wireless and too as well. But like I look at it and I say like, I mean, I have to get over. It's almost like a challenge that I have to give over. I have to identify. I know technology can help, but I don't want it to take over my life. I don't want it to take over, and I also don't want it to be a distraction, like the Slack distraction. That instead of being productive at work, you're using technology, or in reality, you use AI and you lose That's another thing. I don't know if you. No need to get political here, but Andrew Yang is a friend of mine from back in the day, and he's very big on how AI is incorporated in business. And so I think that AI is a great thing, to be honest with you, in my opinion. However, there are things with AI and limitations that we have to remember, that the customers out there still want to connect with people. We can't forget about human connection when this technology is taken over. So I would say that there's a balance, is that the people that are strong on tech and incorporating tech, you want to do it, but you need to, like, once again, I appreciate you're talking about training, because in reality, the first thing I say is like, how much did you budget for that technology? And they're like, oh, this many, 20, let's say $50,000. I'm like, sweet. How much did you budget for the training? And they're like, nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, in that case, what's the point of this? Like, what, at least like tell me, like, because in reality is that if you're going to spend money, do it right. It's like, maybe that's the old school in me, where like my grandpa was like, don't do it if you're not going to do it right, and so maybe that's me, that coming through. But in reality, I see people incorporate tech all the time. The ones that do it right, like they spend the extra time to plan it, put the training in place, put the right budget in place, or honestly, they just don't do it. Because one of the saddest things is when people incorporate, this happens all the time. They get technology, they spend a bunch of money on the tech, and then they don't implement it correctly. then you run into you wasted 100 grand, and legitimately you don't have any adoption. And also, by this time people are kind of frustrated with the tool to get them on. Then you have this, like, I'm in a relationship that I don't want to be in.
Right.
It's like, it's legitimately like a dating situation where you're like, oh, the first, second, third date went really crappy, but let's really get things on track that fourth one. Like, how many like relationships went well when the first 3 dates went crappy? So you got to think of it like that and make sure you set things up for success.
Yes, absolutely. You don't want to be ghosted by your own employees. That's for
And you
sure.
will, and
Yeah.
ultimately, once again, we're seeing it. The people who implement the tech are seeing it through a different lens. We had to fight for the budget. We have more information. We studied it more, and we have to be very self-aware of that when we're communicating with the team, so that we're incorporating their feelings, their thoughts, and also ultimately just their motivations. Understand what will motivate them to, like, if you've read books like Drive and things like that. There's a lot of ways to motivate people in a way where they will do what you want out of their own self-interest and value for themselves and the company. And if you can align the value there, where they see what they're doing to help the company and that's aligned, they're going to be motivated to do it. If you can't do that, then it's going to be hard to get them to adopt.
Great thoughts by John Hall. You can reach out to John by emailing him at johnhallspeaking@gmail.com. John, thanks so much for being a part of the Health Tech Virtual Summit and for sharing all your great insights. We really appreciate you being here.
Well, thanks for having me. It was nice seeing you.
Yes, you too.